inevitable.
And I am scoring 6. SportsZu, I don't feel so good. It's been an amazing summer with the Paris 2024 Olympics, but now it's time for some football. So that's right, the NFL will soon kick off with an amazing Thursday night game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. But while that means we will have one great Thursday night game, we have a whole bunch of other not so good Thursday night games to follow. So, since everybody hates the current state of affairs with Thursday Night Football, we're going to construct a new NFL schedule to vastly improve Thursday Night Football and make it a lot safer for the players. Welcome to the SportsZu. Zoo Crew, welcome back for our first official NFL video. And yes, the NFL is too big to fail, so they probably aren't looking for creative ways to fix their schedule. But everybody knows that Thursday Night Football is the worst football every single week. Plus, we all think that it's not so great for players' safety either. Well, we're going to tackle that today and run the gauntlet to make a new NFL Gauntlet Schedule. If we're creating an NFL Gauntlet Schedule, we've got to first know what a gauntlet even is. So it's a Middle French word from gantelet, or however you say that in French, diminutive of the word gaunt, which equals glove. And beginning in the early 14th century, armorers began to design fully articulated plate armor for their knights and soldiers, which included these gloves that you wore as a gauntlet, which is how we got the terminology throw down the gauntlet, which essentially is just to issue a challenge when the knight would throw the gauntlet to the feet of his opponent, and if the opponent picked it up, it would signify that he was accepting the challenge. But more recently, you may remember that purple guy there that we saw at the beginning of the video. And he had Itri forge this Infinity Gauntlet from the surfaces of Notavalier, and it was made out of a very, very durable metal, so that when you combine the power of the 6 Infinity Stones, the Space Stone, the Mind Stone, the Reality Stone, the Power Stone, the Time Stone, and the Soul Stone, that Thanos could just snap his fingers and he could make half of the universe disappear. Well, while we figure out a way to get that Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos, let's talk about another type of gauntlet, which is the phrase run the gauntlet, which is actually from Swedish Gantlop, from gata, which is lane, and lop, which is course, which was where 2 files of men would line up facing each other, and a person would have to run through these 2 files of men while those men were armed with clubs or other types of weapons to strike the individual as they ran between them. But more recently for American football, there are a few different types of drills that are run, most likely for running backs, where you can see in these 2 YouTube clips here. Okay, so there you see it. You have the running backs running through either 2 lines of defenders or through that machine, and essentially you're trying to strip the ball away from the running back, and his full job is to make sure that he holds on tight to that ball and does not fumble. But the best example of running the gauntlet is actually in professional wrestling, where you have a series of consecutive one fall, which is generally a pin or submission, one fall matches where two wrestlers begin the match, and then as soon as one person is eliminated, a new wrestler comes out and they wrestle until another person is eliminated, and that continues until you get to the final two people, with the person getting the last fall as the winner. So a gauntlet match is a recurring type of match in professional wrestling, but it's not one that happens a whole lot. And since WrestleMania 35, the WWE has had 17 total gauntlet matches, which is just over 3 matches a year, and there's only been one so far in all of 2024 when Sami Zayn became the #1 contender for the Intercontinental title, which he did go on to win at WrestleMania. But the best example of gauntlet matches are KofiMania from WrestleMania 35. So let's go to Dr. OK to explain just what KofiMania was. Doc, let's hear it. I guess that is a bit of a problem that he got snapped away there, so yeah. Okay, so I'm going to handle KofiMania instead. So on February 12th, 2019 on SmackDown, Mustafa Ali was declared medically ineligible to compete inside the Elimination Chamber, which would be for the WWE Championship. So WWE was having a gauntlet match that night to determine who would enter last inside the Elimination Chamber. Now the Elimination Chamber itself is not a gauntlet match, but it is a big time match, which is often for very big stakes like a #1 contender spot for a title, but in this case it was for the ultimate prize of the WWE Championship. So when Ali was declared ineligible, one of the members of the New Day was allowed to be entered inside this gauntlet match and then into the Elimination Chamber. So the New Day selected Kofi Kingston as this member, and he entered into the gauntlet match as one of the first 2 competitors. Not only did Kofi win his first match against the WWE champion Daniel Bryan, he then also defeated Jeff Hardy. Then he defeated Samoa Joe, but he did go on then to lose to AJ Styles with a calf crusher submission. Nonetheless, he lasted more than an hour inside the ring in the gauntlet match and defeated 3 men before he was finally eliminated. Now the match did continue and Randy Orton did defeat AJ Styles to earn the right to be the final entrant inside the Elimination Chamber. So that weekend we got to the Elimination Chamber and Kofi Kingston was the 3rd entrant out of 6 into the Elimination Chamber, which meant he was the first person inside a pod, and there are 4 pods other than the 2 people who start the match. So he was number 3 out of 6 to enter, and he made it to the final 2 after hitting a Trouble in Paradise on Randy Orton. However, Daniel Bryan, as WWE Champion, got the best of him with a running knee to retain the title. Nonetheless, it was a 2nd consecutive amazing effort by Kofi. And in fact, it was so good that on the next SmackDown, there was a 6-man tag match with Kingston, and his team won when he landed another Trouble in Paradise to pin Daniel Bryan to win the match for his team. So SmackDown General Manager Shane McMahon came out and declared Kofi as the #1 contender for Daniel Bryan's championship at Fastlane, which was the next WWE Premium Live event. Now, however, as Kofi went to sign the contract on the next week's SmackDown to officially become the #1 contender, well, just when Kofi was about to sign, WWE Chairman Vince McMahon came out and replaced Kofi with Kevin Owens, who he said was more deserving and qualified than Kofi. But surprisingly, later in the show, Owens himself asked to tag with Kofi in a tag match against Bryan and his partner Eric Rowan. And in fact, Kofi yet again found a way to get a win for his team. But that took us to Fastlane a few weeks later, which was the final premium live event before WrestleMania. And during this pay-per-view, The New Day pleaded to Vince McMahon to add Kingston to the championship match, making it a triple threat match. So Vince told him to go out to the ring, but unfortunately he pulled the strings out from under Kofi yet again and made the match a 2-on-1 handicap match against the Bar, Sheamus and Cesaro, instead of giving Kofi that title opportunity. As you would guess, the New Day was not pleased by this, and they pleaded to McMahon yet again to give Kofi another chance to compete to become the #1 contender at WrestleMania to face Daniel Bryan. So Vince indeed would give him that chance, but only in another gauntlet match, which was held the next week. So of course Kofi had to start the match, and he again would face the Bar, first defeating Sheamus, and then defeating Cesaro. Then Eric Rowan got himself disqualified by using a steel chair and then iron clawed him through an announce table. So with Kofi in really bad shape, Samoa Joe came out to be the next competitor, and he really injured Kofi even more with a coquina clutch. But Kofi found a way to slip through and get a roll-up for the win, bringing on the final competitor of Randy Orton, and amazingly enough, Kofi found a way to pin him as well. And at that point, Kofi's New Day brothers came out and celebrated with him as he was now the #1 contender. But of course, Vince McMahon came out yet again to congratulate Kofi, but also said that he was not yet done and had to get through one more man. And sure enough, it was WWE Champion Daniel Bryan. So with Kofi being so depleted, so hurt, so far through the match, Daniel Bryan was able to beat Kofi. So Kofi was still not the #1 contender. The very next week, however, the New Day yet again pleaded to Vince, saying how unfair this whole process was. But Vince said that Kofi was done with his opportunities, but he would give the New Day one final shot, with Big E and Xavier Woods having to compete in a tag team gauntlet match to earn Kingston the right to be the #1 contender. And of course, the New Day was galvanized by this, so they started the gauntlet and they won their first match against Anderson and Gallows with an up, down, down, then defeated the team of Shinsuke Nakamura and Rusev with another up, down, down. Then they defeated the Bar with a roll-up on Sheamus. Then the Usos, who were the SmackDown Tag Team Champions, came out, and even though they had battled the New Day many times, they forfeited their matchup, saying that they respected what the New Day and Kofi had done, saying that Kofi should be the #1 contender. Well, at that point, there was just one team remaining, and you can guess who it was: Daniel Bryan and Eric Rowan. And even though the New Day was in bad shape after defeating 3 teams in 3 difficult matches and having Big E thrown through a table by Sheamus and Cesaro, Big E somehow found a way to push the announce table on top of Eric Rowan, getting Rowan to be counted out and giving New Day the win, and Kofi officially finally became the #1 contender for Daniel Bryan. So 2 weeks later, we get to WrestleMania 35, and yes, amazing, it is KofiMania, as Kofi finally wins the WWE Championship by defeating Daniel Bryan. And incredibly, this was not just any win, but it was a monumental win, as it was the first time ever in WWE history that a 100% black person was able to win the WWE Championship. Now, we're not gonna say a lot more about that, as we know The Rock is half black, with his father being WWE Hall of Famer Rocky Johnson, and he is a 10-time world champion, including 8 times as WWE champion, and also Booker T won his 6-time championship with the World Heavyweight Championship in WWE, which is still one of the major championships on one of the two major brands, but it is not specifically the WWE Championship, which is the gold standard for all of professional wrestling. So that said, KofiMania, with those 3 gauntlet matches to get Kofi finally to WrestleMania to become that first ever Black WWE Champion, truly was a monumental achievement and the best example ever of running the gauntlet. But now we know what running the gauntlet is, let's get back to the NFL schedule, and it has changed in the number of games played throughout the years, from as few as 10 games around World War II, all the way up now, since 2021, it has expanded from 16 games to 17 games for each team. So let's talk about how we got to today's schedule. There are a few important notes along the way. Now, the NFL switched from 6 divisions to 8 divisions in 2002 when the Houston Texans were added as the 32nd team, where the playoff format was changed so that each division winner and 2 wildcard teams received playoff berths. And since 2020, a 3rd wildcard spot was added so that 7 teams make the playoffs from each conference. Now we also want to talk about bye weeks. Bye weeks were switched back to having no byes during the first 3 weeks or the last 7 weeks in 2002, because in 1999 through 2001, we had 1 team on a bye at least every single week because there were an odd number of teams with 31 teams in the league. So if you had a bye in week 1 or in week 17, you may not have been so happy about it, but let it be known that the NFL has had very early and very late byes in the past. So let's keep that in mind for today's gauntlet schedule. Now, at that point, we also had an 8-year scheduling rotation created, and in 2021, the regular season was increased from 16 to 17 games. So here's what we have now with the 17 games in 18 weeks. Each team plays their 3 other divisional opponents 2 times each to get 6 total divisional games. You then play 4 inter-conference games against 1 division, and also 4 inter-conference games against 1 division. On top of that, you play 2 more intra-conference games against the teams in the divisions that you're not playing completely, but finished in the exact same place in the standings as your team did in the prior year. Now with the addition of that 17 game, the same thing applies for that 1 additional inter-conference game, where you play 1 team in those other divisions that finished in the same place as you in the standings in the prior season. So how do we create this NFL schedule? Well, there are a group of official NFL schedulers that start the day after the Super Bowl, and they have about 3 months to create a full 18-week schedule that has 272 total games in it. And according to AWS, Amazon Web Services, there are about 1 quadrillion possibilities when creating the NFL schedule. So they use a complex algorithm that analyzes over 100,000 potential season schedules until it finds the optimal one. And they use thousands of cloud-based computers powered by AWS to produce thousands of possible schedules. So even with all of that computer power, Charlotte Carey, the NFL Director of Broadcasting, said that when it comes to creating a schedule, there's definitely a mix of art and science involved. So that's because they apparently use over 26,000 rules in their computer system, including, amongst others, whoever the Super Bowl winner gets that traditional opening game on Thursday night. Then, of course, travel requirements, such as travel before and after international games and other long-distance type of travels. There are a whole bunch of primetime games to consider. They do consider the movement of players throughout the league, especially during free agency that is taking place during the creation of the schedules. They also talk about the division rivalries and maximizing these games later in the season. Then there are also stadium blocks where there are certain concerts or other events that may be taking place, or very possibly a nearby baseball stadium will have a game at the same time, that they just don't want to overbook the area all at once, so they have to block out some games. Then, of course, they take care of health and safety concerns, such as not playing so many games within a certain number of days. And, of course, they also say they want to minimize competitive inequities, such as having 3 straight road games in a given season, or playing a road game after a Monday Night Football game. But of course, they also want to maximize TV viewership, almost to a fault, it seems. They want to try to do that. And lastly, we do want to note they do say they pay attention to fan interactions and interest to try to get the games on TV that the fans want to see the most. But after all of those big numbers and all of these factors that they want to talk about, I have to say I'm mostly unimpressed with the results. How could they come up with some of these schedules with all of those opportunities? I just don't get it. Well, as you can see, I am wearing a Steelers hat today because I want to complain about the Steelers 2024 schedule. Based on projected win totals, the Steelers have the hardest schedule in 2024, and based on last year's winning percentage, they have the 3rd hardest schedule with only the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens ahead of them. But you say, SportsZu, wait a minute, hold on a second. You know they were going to be playing these hard teams no matter what. It just so happens that they have a full division of really good teams where no one finished under 500 last year. And they just happen to be playing the NFC East, who was a very competitive division. So no matter what, the Steelers were going to have a good schedule. So okay, you're right about those factors, but let's get into this a little bit more. So sure enough, the Steelers have 6 primetime and or non-traditional Sunday games, which I would consider to be the 1 p.m. or 4 p.m. Eastern games, because they have 1 Thursday night game, 2 Sunday night games, 1 Monday night game, 1 Saturday game, and then 1 very special Christmas Day Wednesday game. But more than just who they're playing and in these specific time slots they are playing, making matters worse, it is when on the schedule these games will be played. So first of all, we want to complain about there being 3 road games in the first 4 games, and in fact, 4 out of the first 6 are on the road, including their first 2 games of the season. But worst of all, beginning in week 11, their final 8 games, all 8 of them are against teams that had winning records last year, with 6 of the 8 being against teams that made the playoffs last year. And the only team that didn't make the playoffs were the Cincinnati Bengals, who probably only made it because Joe Burrow was injured for most of the season. And 6 of the 8 games are against teams with projected win totals of at least 10.5. And the one team that doesn't is the Cleveland Browns, who made the playoffs last year and have a projected win total of 8.5, so they're still projected to be 500 or over as well this year. And on top of it, all 6 divisional games are played in these last 8 weeks. Are you kidding me? 6 out of 8 are in the division to end the season. These are the toughest games of the year. Okay, and worst of all, after all of that, they twice play on short rest. First, weeks 11 and 12. In week 12, they play a Thursday night football game at Cleveland, where they play against the Ravens the week before, so those are surely going to be 2 hard-hitting games. Then, the granddaddy of them all, in weeks 15 through 17, they have 3 games in 11 days, when first they travel to face the Philadelphia Eagles, then they go on the road to face their nemesis, Baltimore Ravens, on a Saturday. Then, to finish it off, they have a Christmas Day game on that next Wednesday. So 3 games in 11 days with 3 really, really good teams. So NFL, you really messed it up for the Steelers this year. You're really putting Mike Tomlin to the test to see if he can find a way to continue that streak of most seasons in a row to start his career of staying at or above 500. So let's go into more depth here about the primetime and other non-traditional games that we may see on an NFL schedule. So our main purpose today is Thursday night football. So let's start with that and dig the deepest there, with it debuting on November 23rd, 2006. Kansas City defeated Denver 19-10 on Thanksgiving night on NFL Network. Of course, we had 2 other Thanksgiving games during the day. That was on Thanksgiving evening, as the way they kicked off Thursday Night Football, and it was called the run to the playoffs with 5 Thursday night and 3 Saturday night games. Now, since 2012, Thursday Night Football has begun on week 2 of the regular season, with Amazon acquiring the rights to Thursday Night Football from 2023 to 2033, but they got to start 1 year earlier in 2022 when the prior partners opted out of that prior deal, so Amazon now streams that on Amazon Prime Video. But after its first season on Prime Video in 22 led to a 46% decrease in viewership, significant changes were made to Thursday Night Football. Teams are now no longer required to have a Thursday night game following a Sunday game, and teams may play up to 2 Thursday games following a Sunday game, where previously everybody basically just had the one game. Now, Thursday night games may also be flexed from weeks 13 to 17 with 28 days prior notice given to the two teams. Now, only games between teams that have not played 2 Thursday games already are eligible, and the same team cannot be flexed twice into Thursday Night Football. In 2024, these schedule makers are trying something a little bit different, with 12 out of the 16 games being divisional games. So maybe they think that will increase the importance and the viewership of those games in particular. Now, we want to note that the Thursday night football game is held by NBC, so the Thursday night football game is actually on Black Friday in the afternoon now as part of the package. And there are several teams that are playing 2 Thursday night football games, at least prior to the flexing of any games, which are the Jets, San Francisco, Seattle, the Rams, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. But speaking of flex scheduling, yes, we've had flexible scheduling in the NFL since 2006 for Sunday night football games, where the NFL says they want to ensure quality matchups on Sunday night in all weeks of the season and give surprise teams a chance to work their way into primetime football. So for Sunday Night Football, it can be used twice between weeks 5 through 10, and then the NFL has discretion to flex any Sunday Night Football game from weeks 11 to 17. Now, the NFL has to give at least 12 days advance notice for flexing games between weeks 5 through 13, but they only have to give 6 days notice for weeks 14 through 17. Now, for Monday Night Football, this is at the NFL's discretion for weeks 12 through 17 only, and you have to announce that change no later than 12 days in advance. Now, for Thursday Night Football, we did talk about requiring the 28 days notice already and a couple other restrictions, and the only additional rule there is that flex scheduling may only be used up to twice for weeks 13 through 17. Now, briefly for the other games, for Thanksgiving, we know that there's been a traditional game hosted by Detroit and Dallas every single year for a very, very long time. And we've had a Thursday night game on Thanksgiving ever since 2002. Now, for Christmas, since 2020, we've had at least one Christmas game every season, even when it's on a day in which the NFL does not usually play. And the craziest thing is this year in 2024, the NFL announced that there will be 2 games on Netflix for Wednesday football on Christmas. First time ever we will see live football on Netflix. And in order to make this work, the NFL is requiring the teams playing on Christmas to play on Saturday to have at least that minimum 3 days of rest. Then we have the international games, and in fact, we're having the first ever game in Sao Paulo, Brazil in week 1 on Friday Night Football between the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Then we will have our traditional London games with 3 of those in October, and you will see there that there are 2 games per usual featuring the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they are the home team once and the away team once. And finally, we're also having a Munich, Germany game this year in November between the New York Giants and the Carolina Panthers. Now, when we talk about the NFL schedule, there are some certain blocked out times and dates every single week that you may not think about because you just have college football on Saturdays and you have high school football on Fridays. But in the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, the act amended antitrust laws to allow sports leagues to pool their broadcasting rights by all their teams and sign league-wide exclusive contracts with national networks. However, the act withdraws that antitrust immunity for any pro football telecasts if a high school or college football game is being played within 75 miles of the broadcasting station on Friday nights after 6 o'clock, or all days Saturdays beginning with the second Friday of September all the way until the second Saturday of December. So there you have it. That blocks out basically everybody for all Fridays and Saturdays. So let's talk about Friday and Saturday NFL games. So we now have this Black Friday NFL game, part of the Thursday Night Football package, and it is played at 3 o'clock Eastern, so it avoids the restriction because on Fridays you only start to be restricted at 6 o'clock. Now, we will note, however, that Week 1 game in Sao Paulo is not subject to the restriction because it is on the first Friday of September, and the restriction does not apply until the second week of September for some reason, even though I'm pretty sure high school football has already begun at that point. Now, for Saturday games, we usually do see some Saturday games at the end of the season every year, and 2024 is no different because in Week 16 we have on the third Saturday of December, which is the first Saturday not subject to the restriction, we have those 2 Saturday games so that those same 4 teams can then turn around and play on Christmas. Now, when we don't have that little issue of something like Christmas going on, in 2023 you see something more normal, like where we had the third Saturday fall in Week 15, so 3 Saturday games were played in Week 15 last year, with 2 more games played in Week 16 and even 1 more played in Week 17. So the NFL takes full advantage of those Saturday games when they can. But let's turn back to Thursday Night Football because it is a poop fest, as so coined by Richard Sherman in Why I Hate Thursday Night Football, that he penned in the Players Tribune all the way back in 2016. Well, Richard, I think everybody's kind of on the same page for that. Now, for him, in this article, he details the differences in the players' week when you have that Thursday Night Football game versus when you have a regularly scheduled Sunday game. So on a Tuesday that you would normally have off for a Sunday game, you no longer get that off. Instead, you have to get work done on your body on Monday, or squeeze it into a full practice day on Tuesday. This includes going to the hot tub or the cold tub, getting a massage, anything to work out all of your little nicks and bruises and injuries that you may have accrued from Sunday or even from weeks prior. So Sherman says that we've seen blowouts, sloppy play, and games that have been almost unwatchable. And it's not the players' fault. Their bodies just aren't ready to play. Well, I guess just from watching the game with our eyes, I think everyone kind of agrees with Sherman. And unfortunately, that has not gotten any worse. And with games being strewn about on all of these different days of the week throughout the year, and even in different countries, well, it seems like there are plenty of ways to interfere with players' body clocks. But on the flip side, Jeff Miller, who is the NFL's VP of Communications, Public Affairs, and Policy, said in March 23 that the flex on Thursday, from a health and safety perspective, over the course of the last several years now, we have not seen a differential injury rate on Thursday night games, or, said more precisely, on games played on short rest compared to games played on longer rest. So, playing those games on Thursday is not a concern from a health and safety perspective. Well, that sounds nice, but I guess when you look at the statistics, we have to admit that that's kind of what we see. So we do have a couple of studies here that line up with what Miller said there. First being the effect of Thursday Night Football on injuries in the National Football League. That was written in the Journal of Orthopedics and Sports Medicine in 2023. It analyzed in-game injury reports for all regular season games from 2011 to 2015. And you can see there that the number of injuries on Sunday is 21.4 injuries per game on Sundays, but just barely more with 21.7 injuries per game on Thursday. So of course, statistically speaking, that is obviously a negligible difference. So of course, their conclusion was that shortened recovery before Thursday games does not have a significant effect on injury rates compared to Sunday games. And additionally, there was no residual effect of reduced rest period affecting players' risk of injury the following week. Then, in a study just a few years earlier in the Harvard Sports Analysis Collective called Thursday Night Football, Better Than You Think, they analyzed several metrics between games on Thursday Night Football against all games on other days from 2012 to 2020. Well, they showed that scoring was just about the same on Thursday as on all other nights, with 45.7 points per game on Thursdays and 46.0 points per game on all other games. So that was obviously not statistically significant. Then for score differential, which they considered to be the competitiveness of games, it was a 12.3 point per game margin of victory on Thursday, and then an 11.4 points per game differential on all other games, so that again was also not statistically significant. And they also analyzed a few other categories such as team strength, showing that the teams themselves playing on Thursday night were basically equally as good as the teams playing on any other game. Then they also talked about penalties, aka sloppiness in a game, and showed the number to be exactly the same number of penalties in Thursday night versus all other games. And then also for turnovers, showing that there was actually very slightly less fumbles on a Thursday night compared to any other game, which of course was not statistically significant. Then when they circled back around to injuries themselves, they showed that Thursday games actually had less injuries than injuries in all other games, with 1.55 injuries per every 100 plays on Thursday, but 1.58 injuries per 100 plays in all other games. So that also was, of course, not statistically significant. So let's specifically talk about Amazon and its streaming deal to carry these Thursday night games. They acquired the rights to become the exclusive Thursday night football broadcaster for approximately $1 billion per year. And as we said, it started in 2022 after the prior deal was voided 1 year earlier. And it includes 15 regular season games per year plus one preseason game. And that equals out to the 15 games because there's no game in week 1 where the Thursday game is by NBC, nor in week 18 because every single team plays on Sunday in week 18, as well as that Thanksgiving night game, which is also held by NBC. But the Black Friday game replaces that Thursday night game for Amazon, with that being shown since last year in 2023. Well, we've talked Thursday night football to death here, so let's turn this in a completely different direction and talk about the lotteries in professional sports, because the NFL is the only one of the 4 major United States sports to not have a lottery. So there is no incentive in the NFL for the bad teams to ever win games. So you might as well just keep on losing to get that number 1 pick. And I think it's safe to say we've seen that many times over the years. So let's talk about those other sports. First, in Major League Baseball, the lottery is held for the first 6 picks in the draft. And because we have revenue sharing and couldn't possibly have a salary cap in Major League Baseball, the lottery distinguishes between the revenue sharing teams such that the revenue sharing teams cannot win the lottery more than 2 times in a row, and the revenue paying teams cannot win the lottery twice in a row. And you can see there we're going to do that for each of the sports here. Here are the odds, and you can see the team with the worst record has a tie for the best odds at 16.5% chance to get the number 1 pick with the number 2 and 3 teams. So all 3 teams have the same percentage to get that first overall pick, going all the way down to team 18 which is the last team that did not make the playoffs. So essentially, you have a chance at the lottery if you did not make the playoffs in the prior season. For the NBA, it's even simpler than that. It is just the top 4 teams are entered into the lottery, and like baseball, the top 3 teams have the exact same odds. This time it is at 14% for each of those 3 teams to win the lottery, and every team that did not make the playoffs yet again gets a chance to be in the lottery, with the 14th team with just a 0.5% chance. Now, in the NBA, we will note that they have the play-in games now, so if you advance to the playoffs, you are out of the lottery, but if you lose those playoff games, you are still then eligible for the lottery. Okay, let's go to the NHL. Only 2 picks are used in the lottery for the NHL, and no team may move up more than 10 picks in the lottery. Very important distinction there. And they have one other restriction, that teams may only win 2 times in any given 5-year period. So let's go back to that 10-pick deal. So if you were the very best team to not make the playoffs, which would be the 16th team for our purposes in the lottery, as there are 32 teams in the NHL, 16 make the playoffs and 16 do not. So if you are that 16th team for the lottery purposes and did not make the playoffs, you have a mere 0.50% chance to win the lottery. But even if you do win the lottery, you can only move up 10 spots to number 6. Okay, with all of that now put together, let's get to our proposal. You know what it is. It's the NFL Gauntlet Schedule. However, you have no idea what's in this Gauntlet Schedule. But first, let's tell you why this is a great idea to have the Gauntlet Schedule. First and foremost, number 1, it is player safety. Yep, Thursday Night Football, it is that poop fest. And now, despite those studies that we truly did acknowledge, we do not think it is safe for the players to play on a mere 3 days rest between Sunday to Thursday. So you play Sunday, you're off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and have to play again Thursday. Richard Sherman pointed out very well that the human body is just not ready to go this early. In fact, in that article, he said you would need to play on Saturday for your body to be fully at rest. You need at least 5 days rest before you're truly able to go. So that's what we're going to do here. We are never going to have anyone play with less than 5 days rest, which we will consider to be called the rest requirement. So if I just say the rest requirement, it is 5 days rest. Now we have to acknowledge there are a couple possible exceptions to this that we will need to include in future CBAs. And that is for the Thanksgiving games, because that is truly an NFL tradition. And also we will include the possibility of allowing Christmas Day exceptions to that rule. But we'll talk about both of those shortly. All right, reason number 2. It will add stakes to the Thursday games. So yeah, we're going to get you that 5 days of rest minimum to play these Thursday games. So what are we talking about for adding stakes to the games? Well, what we know by looking with our eyes is that despite the studies, Thursday night games are generally just bad football compared to any other NFL games. So what we want to do here is provide games that matter more than a standard regular season game. So we're going to make players have full rest here and provide additional stakes just beyond what you get with a regular season game. So we'll get to that here shortly as well. And number 3, anti-tanking and lottery. Well, yeah, that's why we just talked about a lottery a few minutes ago. We're adding the lottery to the NFL, and we're going to find more ways to not allow tanking to get that number 1 pick. So, in addition to just the lottery, we will provide these Thursday night games to have additional stakes as well. So, there will be more incentive to win games throughout the season to improve your odds in the lottery, and winning in the Gauntlet also keeps your schedule easier, which you will soon see, as you are guaranteed to play teams that did not make the playoffs. And lastly, in the current NFL, we have this weird 17th game. So we're going to deal with the 17th game in a creative way here for all NFL teams. So instead of having this one additional inter-conference game, every team now will have a game that is floating on the schedule, which of course is a weird concept perhaps, so we'll get into those details here. So in their 17th game, these non-playoff teams will at least receive the opportunity to gain additional lottery percentage and a chance to play in more primetime games. Okay, I told you the advantages in advance, so keep those 4 things in your head as we actually detail the Gauntlet schedule. So, the Gauntlet itself. What is the Gauntlet? So, all non-playoff teams from the season before, which are 18 out of the 32 teams, are entered into the Gauntlet in reverse order of the NFL standings from the prior season. So the simplest way to say that, it would be the exact same as the NFL draft order if no teams made any trades whatsoever for the NFL draft. So that would be the exact same order of you entering the Gauntlet. So in weeks 1 through 3, the 4 worst teams all enter the Gauntlet at the same time and play a round robin style 3 first games against each other. And whoever has the best record out of those 4 teams advance in the Gauntlet. So the team that wins that original round robin goes to week 4 and plays in the Gauntlet against the next worst team in the league, which would be the 5th worst team in the league. So again, think of your NFL draft. Those first 4 all play at the same time, and then starting in week 4, team 5 is going to come in as the very next team to enter the Gauntlet. So whoever wins the Gauntlet game each week from there on out advances into the next week's Gauntlet game to play the next worst team on the list. And this continues all the way through week 17, when the winner of the week 17 Gauntlet game is your Gauntlet champion. So that means that week 18 stays exactly as it is right now. Everybody plays somebody else from their division on Sunday. So for player safety, we very much care about our rest requirement. Again, 5 days for the rest requirement. So let's talk about the NFL schedule with the Gauntlet. In week 1, that traditional season opener on Thursday night, again, the Ravens are playing the Chiefs this year, that game will move from Thursday to Wednesday. So our round robin Gauntlet games will be played 1 on Thursday, 1 on Friday. Then, in week 2, the round robin Gauntlet games will both be played on Thursday as a doubleheader so that we get our 5-day rest requirement. And then in week 3, the round robin Gauntlet games may be played either again as a Thursday night doubleheader, or now we can even make 1 on Wednesday and 1 on Thursday so that you hit the rest requirement either way. Whichever way Amazon likes best. I'll let them pick that one. Then we finally hit our routine. Generally, weeks 4 through 17, a single Gauntlet game will be played on Thursday Night Football. Now, we are going to have to talk about Thanksgiving and Christmas again as possible exceptions, so we will get to that with 18 remaining exactly as is. Okay, let's talk about bye weeks. They're going to change from what we have now. Now, I admit for our fantasy football fans out there, they hate that we have week 14 byes right now, but I'm sorry, we're going to make this even worse for you fantasy football fans. So, bye weeks. There will be exactly 2 teams on byes every week starting in week 3 all the way through week 16. Except for 1 week, the week before Thanksgiving, we'll have 6 teams on bye so that we don't interfere with that rest requirement. And also, only playoff teams will be eligible to play against either Dallas or Detroit in those 2 traditional Thanksgiving Day games. Now, the most important part to have that player safety. Every team entering the Gauntlet will have their bye the week prior to its first Gauntlet game. So they will play on a Sunday, then they will be off, and then they will enter the Gauntlet on that Thursday night football game. Except, of course, for Gauntlet teams 1 to 4 because they're playing in that round robin to start the season. So their bye weeks will be in those last 4 weeks of bye weeks, 13, 14, 15, and 16. However, under that miraculous scenario where teams 1 through 3 remain in the Gauntlet and undefeated when its scheduled bye occurs, that bye will be replaced by Team 4. So they'll just switch byes, and that'll mean they'll switch opponents possibly as well, but they have to do it to keep that rest requirement. Now, if those first 4 teams remain in the gauntlet in week 16, no byes will occur that week, and Team 18 will play the gauntlet game replacement team. Then in that same week, week 16, team number 18 will have to play the gauntlet game replacement team, which we will define later about what this replacement team is. And finally, that one team that has made it all the way through the gauntlet, that team and team 18 will have byes in week 17, and the gauntlet championship game will occur then in week 18. So we will have to do a little shuffling there in that very, very, very unlikely scenario that those very worst teams from the season before make it all the way through the gauntlet. But wouldn't that be pretty darn cool? Just like good old Kofi. Okay, so let's talk about our special games. First, the international games. Sometimes you see that teams will want their bye to be right after they play the international game, and sometimes they don't have those byes. So we're just getting rid of that. There will be no more bye weeks given out the week following a team playing internationally, unless it just so happens that they were scheduled for that bye week anyways, based on the way this schedule works out. Now, Jacksonville, we know they want to have those London games, so they will have preference to play up to 2 of these London games, but they will not be permitted to play in them in any season in which they enter the gauntlet prior to the 3rd Sunday in October, because we don't want them rubbing up against too much before their start of the gauntlet. So they really need to make sure that they're not in the gauntlet before that 3rd Sunday in October, so their early October games in London don't interfere with the gauntlet. Of course, the best way to do that is just make the playoffs, Jacksonville, and you'll be good to go. Okay, now on to the holidays. First, Thanksgiving. When Dallas and Detroit are both playoff teams, we have no conflict. The gauntlet can run nice and perfectly as planned. However, when one or both of them are not playoff teams, so we're going to assume that those 2 teams are going to want to continue to do that because it is truly an NFL tradition. If the NFLPA approves it, we will say, okay, you can put this into the CBA. The players are on board with this, even though we don't believe this is the best interest for the safety of the game. Maybe this is a one-time exception every year we're going to allow for these 2 traditional Thanksgiving games. So for Dallas and Detroit, when they do have to play these games and be in the gauntlet in the same season, you can see we have to kind of mess with their bye a little bit. But the general rule is that their bye week will before they enter the gauntlet, not before the Thanksgiving game. But there will be some scenarios there that you can see when that will happen instead. Now, there is one very, very limited possible exception here. It is possible Dallas and Detroit might play each other in the gauntlet on Thanksgiving. It's not likely, but it's possible. So we have an example here in that very unlikely scenario. Let's say Detroit wins the gauntlet game the week prior to Thanksgiving. We'll just say they played Atlanta that week for no apparent reason. We had to pick somebody. And so Dallas just so happens to be the team that is scheduled to enter the gauntlet on Thanksgiving week. So they obviously would be scheduled for a home game on Thanksgiving. So Detroit, unfortunately, they're going to be out of luck. Yes, they advanced in the gauntlet, which is the more important thing, but sorry, they're gonna have to play at Dallas here. So it gets a little tricky about who plays who during that Thanksgiving week, so we've written it out here on this slide. So feel free to pause and read that if you are interested, but if not, let's just keep on rolling. So we also have Black Friday, so there are only 2 options here. So we could go back to only having 2 games on Thanksgiving, being the 2 traditional games with Dallas and Detroit, and then have a Black Friday game as the Thursday night football game, or we can just cancel the Black Friday game. Otherwise, the rest requirements just aren't going to be able to be met, and also deal with that antitrust rule at the same time that is still in effect over Thanksgiving. So that's the only way to do it. Whichever way Amazon wants to go, I'm fine with it. Give an extra day of rest for the team in the gauntlet if they want it. But otherwise, we'll just have no Black Friday game. Okay, now let's talk about Christmas. It's a little tricky. So, as you may or may not know, Thanksgiving actually has to be held between November 22nd and November 28th, wherever the fourth Thursday of November happens to line up. So we've done it on this slide here that every single possibility for Thanksgiving is here, and when it is that particular day, then you know what day of the week Christmas will be on. So for a lot of these, it works out pretty fine for us on how many games you have to be able to just normally play a game or two or three on Christmas, however you want to do it. But the tricky one here is on Tuesday. What happens if we have Christmas on a Tuesday? Well, the only way this will work is that if you are willing to have up to 6 teams play on Monday on the following week. Now, if you really want to have 3 games on a Monday, I guess that's fine. If you want to do that for only 4 teams, that is also fine. You can't really do it to 2 teams because the only way to keep the rest requirement would be to have those exact same 2 teams play again. So obviously you don't want to do that. So you pretty much could have it kind of work out the way we have it this year with 4 teams playing on Tuesday and then the following Monday to keep the 5-day requirement going. But we also want to know that sometimes, like this year, Christmas is week 17 of the NFL schedule. So if the following week is going to be week 18, you can't really make that work if you want to have every single team play on a Sunday in week 18. Okay, and let's briefly talk about divisional games here. As we've said a couple times, week 18 is staying as is. But otherwise, to reduce the possibility of the preemption of division games, we're also giving preference to having divisional games be held in weeks 1 through 3 and again in weeks 16 through 18. So ideally, if it's possible, which I don't think it's fully possible, but for the most part, if we can do it, weeks 1 through 3 will be the first times playing the teams in your division, and then you end the season in those last 3 weeks as well. And on top of that, no divisional games will be scheduled for any team entering the gauntlet for 2 weeks after its initial gauntlet game. So that keeps us as much as possible away from having any divisional games go away. And so you have to win at least 3 gauntlet games before there's even a chance that you will lose any divisional games. So that would be pretty good. We would like to see those runs in the gauntlet, but there is a possible consequence there. So we're going to avoid it by having at least those 2 additional weeks with no divisional games. Okay, now the big one. Let's talk about the 17th game. This is what we talked about, the additional interconference game being removed, and we've brought this up a couple times with the gauntlet replacement game. So first, for the gauntlet teams, their initial gauntlet game is that 17th game. For the playoff teams, a gauntlet replacement game is their 17th game. So what is the gauntlet replacement game? You can see here that the team that wins a gauntlet game continues in the gauntlet. So if they're in the gauntlet, they're not going to play their regularly scheduled game. So that team that they were supposed to play, well, they just don't have a game. So that is where we get that team every single time. We'll play a gauntlet replacement team. So that playoff team will just not know who it's playing until after that Thursday night game the week before, where they will see who wins the gauntlet game, and they'll play whoever that winner was supposed to play in the next week. Pretty tricky wrinkle there, but I think a lot of people might not be so excited about not exactly knowing who you're playing. But I just want to take you back a couple years to our COVID seasons, where we had all kinds of craziness in the schedule. First, for the NFL, well, it wasn't that bad, really. So first we had San Francisco have to move 3 games to Arizona. Then we had 6 other games that simply had to be moved back a few days. And most notably was that Thanksgiving night game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers that was moved back from Thursday night all the way until the following Monday. It was rescheduled 3 times, so it was played 6 full days later, all the way back from November 26th to December 2nd. Pretty incredible stuff there. But of course, that's not all, as we had several other affected games. First, there were a couple swapped games between week 4 with the Steelers and the Tennessee Titans that got moved to week 7. So because of that, the Steelers' week 7 game against the Ravens got pushed back 1 week to week 18. So the Steelers were left with that week 4 bye that I'm sure they didn't want, and they eventually cratered at the end of the season. That was a rough one. Such a good start, such a bad ending. But I digress. But the big one here is you can see that 7 games were affected. It was kind of a cascading effect. The schedule was just completely moved around between all of these teams listed here, just to make it work due to COVID. So you can see that when the NFL has to make some changes and teams have less notice, it can happen and really go off without a hitch. So if it's just a part of your schedule that you don't really know until 10 days before who your opponent will happen to be, well, that's just the luck of the draw, and it's even for literally everyone because that's just the way your schedule works. But we did have COVID for 2021 as well, and we didn't have anything nearly as bad as what we did, but things got a little dicey in December, so we did have 3 games that got pushed back a couple of days during 1 week. But let's go back to 2020, where things got absolutely crazy for NCAA football. A total of 114 regular season games were postponed or canceled, and we had shorter seasons that year. If you can remember, there was a delayed start to the season. We had conferences that only had conference games or just maybe 1 non-conference game in their schedule. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish, in all of their independent glory, had to go and reduce themselves to being in the ACC for 1 season, even though they're in the ACC for all the other sports. Well, they actually had to submit and be in the ACC for that year. And yes, sadly, they made the ACC title game, but at least they lost that game. Then we had a game that was not on the calendar, which was Cal and UCLA, and you would think they normally would play each other, but I guess they're not playing each other anymore now, are they? But nonetheless, they added that game when their opponents had to cancel. Then we had the very fun undefeated game where BYU and Coastal Carolina were both undefeated at the end of the season, so they both played on December 5th to see who the better undefeated group of 5 team was. Shockingly, we had the first Army-Navy game being held on a non-neutral site for the first time since World War II. And even more shocking, we had the Rose Bowl played not in Pasadena, but in Arlington, Texas at AT&T Stadium. And in addition to the movement of the Rose Bowl, we also had 19 bowl games were canceled. Now, maybe looking at things in 2024, it's not so bad to cancel those bowl games. But hey, at the time, it was really a big deal. And on top of that, in 2021, those late season games was also when COVID really kicked in again, and we had 5 bowl games canceled as well that season. So really, this is just to emphasize the point that moving games around and not exactly knowing who your opponent is really not that big of a deal, folks. It's not that big of a deal. And it's actually kind of cool and exciting if you think about it. Now, another additional and fun quirk to our gauntlet schedule is that we will have substitution games. So teams 1 through 4 have to play those 3 round-robin gauntlet games to start the season. So instead of having 16 games scheduled, they now just have 14 games scheduled. So in addition to losing that 17th game interconference-wise, they also lose those 2 intra-conference games against the teams from the other divisions. So we have to have substitution games to fill in the missing games now from the other teams that were supposed to play those round-robin gauntlet teams. So here is our example using the schedule for 2024 if we had a gauntlet schedule this season. So the games lost would be Carolina's 2 games, Washington's 2 games, Arizona's 2 games, and New England's 2 games. Now, some of those are overlapping where they're playing each other. As you can see, Arizona plays Carolina, Washington plays Arizona. So that leaves us with just 2 games that need to be filled in. Chicago is losing out on playing Carolina at home, and they're losing out on playing Washington on the road, as well as New England at Cincinnati and the Chargers at New England. So that makes it pretty easy. Chargers play at Chicago in 1 substitution game, and Chicago then plays at Cincinnati in the other substitution game. Well, you might say this might be more convincing if we could actually see the schedule for this, and I will admit that I think I'm pretty good at making a schedule, but I'm not really a computer programmer who can fill in 272 games perfectly, so I'll say that I tried, and I got it down to 9 games that were not quite filled in correctly, so unfortunately, I cannot show off my brilliance today by having a fully perfect NFL schedule and beating those 4,000 plus computers that the NFL schedulers have at their disposal. But I will show you one division that worked out perfectly for me. It is the NFC West. We have Arizona, Seattle, the Rams, and San Francisco here. Most importantly, here's Arizona. They've got those 3 round-robin gauntlet games to begin the schedule. And Seattle also did not make the playoffs, so they have a gauntlet game. They were one of the better teams that didn't make the playoffs, so their gauntlet game is not until week 15. And you can see that they have a bye week right before that. Now Arizona, since they are a round-robin team, their bye gets put all the way at the end of the season, and for them it worked out that they would get it in week 16. Now the Rams and the Niners both made the playoffs, so they do not have gauntlet games, so instead they have gauntlet replacement games. The Rams is in week 4, so their bye week ends up being in week 3. And San Francisco's gauntlet replacement game is in week 12, so their bye week is in week 11. So even though the gauntlet replacement games are played on Sunday, for the most part, the byes come right before the gauntlet replacement games. There are a few instances where that's not the case, and that's for the teams that play on Thanksgiving, where they have the byes the week before Thanksgiving, but their gauntlet replacement games are at the end of the season, just the way it works out. So on top of just having some fun with the gauntlet, let's go to the NFL lottery to have a lot more fun. So what we're doing here is that 50% of the lottery odds will be determined by that year's league standings, as you see in the other 3 main sports in the United States, and the other 50% of the lottery odds will be determined by the gauntlet results. So what do we mean by that? Well, we've got the odds right here on this slide. The one on the far left you can see is the traditional lottery odds. So we have 18 teams that do not make the playoffs at the end of the year, so all of them are entered into the lottery. Like in the other sports, we have the 3 worst teams all receiving the same highest percentage of lottery odds. Well, since we only have 50%, we made that 7.5% lottery odds for each of those 3 teams, and that drops all the way down to a 0.5% chance of winning the lottery for those bottom 4 teams on the list there. Then, more excitingly, from the gauntlet. So what we have first are the 3 weeks of round-robin games, so there are 6 total games. So we're going to count those a little bit less because those 4 teams automatically get 3 cracks at it instead of just maybe only 1. So if you win one of those 3 games, you get a 1.57% chance to win the lottery just from winning 1 game. So win all 3, you get 5.25% chance of winning the lottery. Then once we get into the regular gauntlet schedule, starting in week 4 all the way through week 17, well, you get 2.5% chance of winning the lottery for winning your gauntlet game. So you want to keep playing on Thursday night, keep winning those gauntlet games to keep racking up the odds to win that lottery. Well, then you've got to have some prize at the end, so we are giving 4.5% for the team that wins the Gauntlet Championship. We didn't want to make that too big of a number because obviously team number 18 could just play 1 game and win the Gauntlet Championship. So we don't want to give them 2.5% chance just from winning the 1 game and then a bonus of another 10% there. So we tried to keep that to a reasonable number right there of just 4.5% for being the champion. So let's talk about the other specifics. We'll go with 4 teams, just like in the NBA, are selected to win the lottery. And just like in the NHL, we are going to limit this to not being allowed to move up more than 10 spots because you could really be good and end up winning the Gauntlet Championship and have no right to move up from the late 20s or so all the way up to number 1. That would be quite a jump. So that's why we're going to have that NHL restriction there. However, we're going to allow a pretty darn good jump. So any team that actually makes the NFL playoffs but has lottery odds by being a part of the Gauntlet, well, they're going to be considered the 19th team for the purposes of the lottery. But of course, we're having 4 teams win the lottery, so if we happen to have up to 4 teams that make the playoff all win the lottery, well, those teams will be considered the 19th place, 20th place, 21st, and 22nd place teams for the purposes of the lottery. Pretty unlikely that's going to happen, but just in case, we've got it covered. Okay, let's go over an example for this, and we will again talk about Arizona. They are the number 4 team this year, so they are in that round robin. Let's say that Arizona goes 3-0 in their round robin play, so they advance to play team number 5, which is the Chargers, and they win again. And then they advance to play team number 6, which is the Giants, but they lose. So Arizona then goes back into their regular season schedule. They play out the rest of the season, but it doesn't treat them nearly as well, so I guess they're playing teams that are better than the absolute worst teams in the league, so they go just 3-9 the rest of the season. So they finish the season at 7-10. They miss the playoffs, and for our purposes, we'll call them team number 10 for the purposes of the lottery. So let's look at their lottery odds. Well, in the Gauntlet, they won 3 round robin games, so they get 5.25% there. And they also won in week 4 against the Chargers, so that gives them another 2.5% for 7.75% in the Gauntlet. Not too bad for winning 4 games. And then, of course, their overall record was the 10th worst record in the league, so that gets you 2% lottery odds. So add those together, they've got a 9.75% chance to win that number 1 overall pick. Now let's go to a much better Gauntlet team for this year. We'll go with Seattle for our example. So in weeks 1 through 13, they're just going along in their regular season schedule. They go 7-6 in those games. So they have a bye in week 14 before they enter the Gauntlet in week 15 as team number 16. So they win their first Gauntlet game in week 15, and so then they go on and advance to week 17 to play Jacksonville, and they're going to win that too. So they advance to team number 18 in week 17 for the Gauntlet Championship against Cincinnati. And, well, we're going to say Seattle wins that too, so they are your Gauntlet champions. So then they also go on with all of this momentum and a couple extra days rest for week 18. They go on and win their last regular season game. They go to 11-6 for the regular season. They make the playoffs, and they do pretty well there too, but finally fall in the NFC Championship. So let's look at their lottery odds. They won 3 games in the Gauntlet. That gets them 7.5% right there. And then on top of it, they're your Gauntlet champions for another 4.5%, giving them a 12% chance at the number 1 pick. Now, obviously, they made the playoffs, so they don't get any additional lottery odds there. But since they made it to the NFC Championship game, well, they've got to be the 29th or 30th team. We'll just call them team number 30 for the purposes of the lottery. So if they don't win the lottery, they just get the number 30 pick, as they always would. But if they win the lottery, well, they're going to be as high as pick number 9. Because, as we said, if you're the first team that made the playoffs to win the lottery, you automatically get placed as team number 19, and then on top of that, you get to move up 10 additional spots. So, for winning 3 Gauntlet games, being the Gauntlet champion, you have won the lottery with that 12% chance, and now you have the number 9 pick. Pretty darn good reward, if you ask me, for having to play 3 straight Thursday night games. Okay, so let's again rehash our pros for having the Gauntlet schedule. Number 1, first and foremost, player safety. You've got 5 days off for every single game with those few very small caveats that we talked about, but in general, 99+% of the games are going to have at least 5 days rest. So, in addition, we said we're having big stakes to every single Thursday night football game because the winner gets to keep playing on Thursday night, which I know some people might not particularly like, but you get those lottery odds every single week for winning, and you keep regular rest for Thursday night. So, Richard Sherman said that the very best Thursday night game was the week following Thanksgiving, because, well, both teams were on regular rest. So the Gauntlet games, the Gauntlet winner from the prior week is going to have regular rest. The new team entering the Gauntlet is going to have a lot of rest because they're just coming off of their bye. So these are going to be great games because we know when you look at it with your eyes that these teams are not playing to their best capabilities. And yes, the NFL is going to point you to those statistics, but number one, here's what we're going to say about it. One, yeah, everybody's playing badly. When you have two full teams of everyone playing badly, just because there aren't maybe more official injuries or the points scored are ending up about the same, it's because, well, yeah, everybody's playing worse than what they are on any other given week. So there's no advantages gained, but it's just bad football, and we've seen it with our eyes for many years now. And point two, we know that these games are already bad in our regular schedule, so even if we're playing with teams that didn't make the playoffs on these Thursday games, well, now it's going to be extra exciting with those extra stakes. They're really playing for something, and you can really get some darlings that make some runs, and they will appeal to the fans for having that success. And the next thing we talked about is anti-tanking. Not only do you want to win your Gauntlet games this season, but you also want to keep winning so that you have a better position to win the Gauntlet next season. So yeah, even if you are not so good this year and aren't going to make the playoffs, win a few Gauntlet games because you're playing worse teams, and then maybe you can be near the end of the Gauntlet so you can win and get that Gauntlet championship the next season. And lastly, we just love lotteries. That's why everybody else has them. That's why the NHL adopted it fairly recently. That's why the MLB just picked it up in the last couple of years. It's another event to show on television, get people excited, and keep teams from tanking. So it's really a great thing to have for every single reason. The NFL likes to have at least one event every single month in the offseason, so why not have the lottery be one of them? That is a really good thing instead of maybe, I don't know, an extra week of OTAs or mini camps. I don't know. Nonetheless, the lottery is the way to go. Okay, but yes, let's talk about the cons. Of course, it creates greater schedule imbalances with schedules that are not 100% in advance. It is possible to have more or less than 8 or 9 home games. I was not able to quite work it out the way I wanted it to, but with those 4,000 plus computers and AWS, I'm sure we can make it perfect. So I believe in us. We can do it once we've got the computer in front of us. So if anybody out there, AWS or any computer programmer knows how to make full NFL schedules, get in contact here. Let's do it. Let's sit down and make this Gauntlet schedule happen. On top of that, yes, like I said, it is possible to not play division games, but that means you've won at least 3 Gauntlet games, and that is a good thing for your team. If you're rolling through these Gauntlet games, well, you can just not worry about playing a division rival one time during the season. I think you can survive since you play them twice every single year. Okay, some other people might not like playing on Thursday Night Football several times in a row. But again, that would be good for your team because you're gaining that lottery percentage and, of course, just winning football games. And you're doing so on regular rest. You're playing a primetime game every single Thursday night in front of everybody, standalone games. That's what you want to have. So even in a con, these last two are actually really good things to have. But of course, I guess the fans might not like having to show up on Thursdays and not particularly knowing if they're going to have a home game or away game. Now, for the Gauntlet, you will alternate. The team entering the Gauntlet will have a home game one week, then the team entering the Gauntlet the next week will have an away game so that the team that won would get the home game. So it's not actually going to work out badly for anyone entering the Gauntlet or being in the Gauntlet. They're going to keep alternating between home and away. It's just that it might not be so fun for the fans, not particularly knowing what they're going to have on a given week. And lastly, tiebreaker scenarios, well, they're going to be a little bit tricky because things are going to get a little off kilter with division games changing, in-conference versus out-of-conference games, head-to-head matchups. Well, it just might be a little trickier, but I'm sure someone really smart can figure out how to have the best tiebreakers for your NFL playoffs or for potential draft picks going forward. I'm not really concerned about that, but I'll give it a slight knock against as something that we should consider. All right, so there you have it. Again, any computer programmers out there, let me know. Let's create the schedule. And for anybody else out there, yeah, I didn't make this quite perfect, but maybe you can improve it. This is just the start for something more fun than what we have with a pretty generic NFL schedule as it is. There's really no excitement in here. You're not playing every team. You only play a team from the other conference at home every 8 years. That's not so great. So I don't know. I think we have a lot of ways to improve this. Really getting player safety down is really important. Really getting better football on Thursday is also really important. Those are just things we need to have for these Thursday games because they are dreadful compared to every other game on the NFL schedule. When a Sunday game, all those Sunday games, NFL Red Zone, it is as exciting as it gets. So these Thursday games, man, let's get them better. Let's get some more theories out there. Let me know, leave some comments. Let's get this party started on how we can make the NFL schedule better. But for now, we're adding stakes to Thursday Night Football and having a gauntlet with a lottery. Pretty exciting start to fixing the NFL schedule. Well, Zoo Crew, thanks for sticking through this one with me. I know it's fun. There's a lot of good football to watch here coming up, and even if Thursday Night Football isn't so good, it's still better than not having football at all. So until next time, this has been the Sports Zoo. He who remains. I got myself pruned, I went to the void, I got past Goliath. If I just tell you that I've talked to you infinity times, will you let me get back to Thanos?
And around, and around, and around we go.
Make the hard choice. When you cause a war that kills us all, game over.
That sounds like Endgame to me.
Inevitable.
And I am SportsZu.